Hello, everyone. Let's unwind after a hard week with these stories that will both astound and delight you. Welcome to this week's Roundup. This is for you if you've missed some of our videos or simply wish to rewatch them. Like and subscribe to receive more stories like this. Remember to provide the timestamp of your recommended content in the comment area. Story 1. My parents separated earlier this year. It was 100% my dad's fault due to being an abusive textbook narcissist. Mom put their house up for sale, and he had 2 months to sort out his move. He claimed to have nothing, no support, and nowhere to go. My husband and I took pity on him, and despite having a newborn and both working, helped him pack, sell off the extra furniture to get him some cash, and I found him a secure place to buy in his budget. He turned around and said he didn't want to move into the type of place I found, an over 50s village, he's 73, because he wouldn't be able to take chicks back there to smash. He then refused to leave the property and said the cops would have to shoot him to get him out of the house. When I put pressure on him because otherwise the sale would have fallen over and they would have been sued, he threatened self-unaliving, which he does absolutely every time something isn't going his way, and to burn the house down repeatedly in front of my 7-year-old kid. Eventually, he does comply, and we move him into the granny flat of a woman he met playing pokies, slot machines for you US types, and who is apparently a millionaire from a famous family. I call hogwash, but he clearly thinks he's found someone new to mooch off. They've been at the pokies every day for months now. His money won't last long at this rate. Then I found out that through all this, all the stress and hogwash he put me through when I should have been in a happy new baby cocoon, he actually had an offer from a longtime friend to move in with him and his wife, and they had a whole team of people willing to help him with his move. Considering that he ghosted them after they made that offer, though, they've since decided to discontinue the friendship since he's shown he didn't value it or them. Guess what? My husband and I are also done with him. I was the last kid that spoke to him. So he went from being married with a family to living in insecure housing, hurtling towards poverty and homelessness, having burned every bridge he had. All because he's too narcissistic to accept that he is less than perfect and that he is ultimately responsible for his own life. That rant felt good. Edited to define pokies, which is Australian slang for slot machines from poker machines. Oh, wow. It sounds like this person is used to living the life he wants, but everything is changing around him and he doesn't know how to change or even want to change, and thinking people will just lay down and just let him do whatever he wants, and he's about to discover that's not the case. That's going to be scary. Story 2. My ex is weirdly a reverse of this. Oh, good, we got this kind of a story. Too long didn't read? We were unhappy together. We split when he cheated. Everyone involved seemed much happier for a while, but his life has gone downhill since. Together, we were miserable. There was nothing good about that relationship. He ended up cheating, among other smeggy behaviors, and we split. For a while, it seemed like everybody was better off. He seemed happy to be with his affair partner. I was just thriving, being single. The kids were much happier because it turns out a home with 2 deeply unhappy parents is terrible for children. It was all looking up. He and I were civil and focused on co-parenting. About a year after the split, things seemed to just start spiraling for him. He lost his job in a niche field where you really had to be the best of the best to get sustainable work, and he was simply never the best of the best. He was getting by on piecemeal contracts and simply won't retrain into another more stable field, or even just supplement his income with something like bartending or food service or anything. His girlfriend had some kind of injury needing repeated surgeries that's limited her ability to work, so he's the breadwinner on a low and sporadic income. He started to become increasingly inconsistent with the kids and would disappear from their lives or on and off, so they, being children, turned more and more to me for stability. His views became increasingly alt-right and anti-science, which, in my opinion, just makes you an angry, disconnected person who thinks society is persecuting you. And also, it turns out, I had all the financial sense in the relationship and did all his life admin. And he doesn't know how to do a lot of basic smeg like refinance loans or do taxes, so there's been this long list of totally avoidable financial near disasters occurring because he didn't do X, which would have prevented Y. Or comes to ask me for money because he's taken out payday loans and, surprise, the interest is brutal. I learned my lesson there. I don't help him with money now. Meanwhile, I'm doing great. My kids are doing great. They like spending time with him, but don't really see him as a person to turn to for support or comfort. I look back on that first year and he seemed happy, and I'm at a bit of a loss for how it's all gone to smeg for him in the years since. I'm glad it's worked out for her, and I'm glad the kids seem very stable, but man, it just sounds like this is like a younger version of the previous story. It just seems like he's hurtling towards some kind of very bridge-burned future of everything. Story 3. My sister was offered an incredible, well-paying job doing something she's great at. She decided it would be too easy and opted for a far more challenging job in a far less appealing setting, with a butthole of a boss she was hoping to impress. She's fracking miserable now. I honestly don't get why she does this sort of smeg to herself. I almost understand where she's coming from, and it's not a healthy place. When I was in high school, I would gravitate towards people who weren't particularly impressed with me and try to change their minds. I don't know why I did it. I rationalized it to myself like their lack of faith in me will lead to me working all the harder and getting all the better. But it just led to a miserable adolescence. Left that behind in college, though. This is literally the same concept as the guy's cousin above, who can't accept men who like her, but chase after those who don't. If you don't like me, I'll prove to you why you should mentality. You said it was sad to see, but this is the same scenario minus the romantic relationship aspect. Literally the same. You're trying to gravitate towards people who weren't impressed with you and trying to change their minds. Never mind the people who can see your worth already without you having to prove anything. Applicable to many situations. Almost like if you're able to change their minds, you somehow earned it. Like you have to earn it for it to be justified or mean anything for it to be real. Just pointing that out to you. My mom was like that. When I was younger, she worked part-time at Target as a cashier and was amazing at selling their credit cards and service plans. So good that a guy from Merrill Lynch who went through her line a couple of times offered her a job. She thought it sounded fake and never called him, despite my encouragement because this could have gotten her out of poverty and she's always been great at sales, but still continued trying to become her own boss, doing MLMs and weird online marketing schemes. It drives me insane with how many good salesmen there are in retail who shy away from sales because the commission isn't secure. It's never too late for her. Sales departments are ghost towns due to staffing shortages, and companies will take anyone who can hold a conversation without crying from social anxiety. I do respect people who are good at sales. I've never been good at it myself, even when I have to sell myself, quote unquote, to be able to get jobs for different things. And it's amazing. Have you ever found someone that's had this kind of a mentality that they have to feel like they earn respect or money from a harder opportunity than one that was well suited for them? Let me know. Story 4. I have a family member who inherited about $500,000 in cash and assets when his mother passed. He had a decent job at the time. This inheritance meant that he started taking longer vacations and stopped consistently working. He bought a sports car and paid off the 2 pre-built condos that his mother had put down payments on, but sold one immediately at a loss and then rented the other out for a while until his original tenants moved out, then let it sit vacant for over a year and sold it at a loss. He loaned money to his half-sister to pay for tuition at a job that would never allow her to repay him. He bought every new and interesting piece of electronics. The electronics eventually caught up with him. He went on holiday to the USA, and on his way back across the border, the guards wanted to search his laptop, which led to the discovery of child corn. He was also trying to groom his niece, daughter of the half-sister. There wasn't much money left from the estate at that point. He was arrested and only managed to stay out of jail on a technicality that a very expensive lawyer found. He paid mid-$50,000 for his defense. The 2 or 3 years that the criminal defense was going on, he didn't work at all. Just dipped out on his employer, who would have continued employing him. He sold the sports car at a loss. Sold his last remaining property, the condo, at a loss. Sold a bunch of his expensive toys at a loss. Ended up penniless. Actually, probably bankrupt, but not in jail. Now, his life consists of living in a small rented bedroom and working as a local trucker. He didn't just destroy his life. He nuked it from orbit and then salted the ground. He's currently in his late 40s and will probably never be able to retire. Most of the family won't speak to him at all. Story 1. I grew up in that part of North Carolina. I remember a billboard they put up with her picture. It was on my way to school, so I saw it pretty much every day when I was growing up. They updated it at some point with an age progression. Such a tragedy. I really feel bad for her parents. I can't imagine what it must feel like after all these years to still not know what happened and if she's still out there somewhere. I had a friend vanish about 10 years ago in Texas. She bought a drink to go to a waffle place and car, purse, and all were found in the parking lot. Her remains were found 5 years later, chalked up to self-unaliving. Bothered me a lot, the entire 5 years before they found her remains. And now, the whole scenario bothers me. Partly because she messaged me a few days before, but I was too caught in my own depression to respond for a couple of weeks. So I'm going to go with, as bad as that was, her parents went through a vastly worse experience. Just a reminder that you not responding because of your own depression and life circumstances does not make you at fault. And I hope you're not feeling guilty because of it. I knew someone who was struggling right as COVID hit. I saw her Facebook post, which was a post about having a hard time and meant to respond, but didn't in that moment because things were absolutely bananas with COVID hitting when I was a senior in college. It was the week before and during when everything was starting to close on the East Coast. I looked at Facebook a few days later and found she had completed self-unaliving a few days after the post. I didn't know her well at all, but carried guilt for not responding for a long time. I guess I still carry some because I'm tearing up as I write this. Regardless of what happened to your friend, I hope you're able to find some semblance of peace too. Of course, her parents are in pain, but please don't discount your own pain. It's valid, and I can imagine very raw. I hope your friend's memory can be a blessing to you. I hope things are looking up for you. From one stranger to another, I've struggled with the same, and I just want you to know you're not alone. And the planet is absolutely a better place just because you exist. I wish both of the people we knew had known that. Hugs if you want, and my inbox is open. We've had a stellar couple years for old cases. Golden State unaliver getting caught, Delphi unalivers getting cracked open, Boy in the Box getting identified, Brittany Drexel's unaliver confessing. We might be around the corner from it. I think we will see this one solved in our lifetime. I'm trying to think back, and I cannot think of anyone close to me that has ever gone missing and then turned up, passed away. And I don't know. Have any of you ever had that happen to you? What is that like? I just cannot imagine having that loss and just going between hope of maybe finding that loss resolved and never knowing. Story 2. I live in Minnesota and have driven around that area. It's fairly remote. You can drive for miles and miles and see nothing but corn. So what confuses me is, why did he leave his car? It was dark in a large desolate area. I get that he was like 19 or whatever, but he couldn't have lacked that much sense. I'm thinking he had either some kind of crazy substance in his system, which I think is most likely, something was chasing him, or someone was making him walk out into the nothingness. It just doesn't make sense otherwise to leave your car when you've got your parents on the phone looking for you. One podcast I listened to also mentioned there were a couple of hours unaccounted for, so there was speculation that maybe when he ran off the road, he hit his head and blacked out for a bit, which then caused confusion. I feel like I remember hearing that his parents told him to start walking to them. They gave him a location, etc. But of course, it turns out that he wasn't even remotely in the same area as they were. He may have been confused as to where he was. I don't know. Thought maybe there's a reason he's walking? Apparently, he saw lights in the distance and thought he would walk to the town they were coming from after his parents, and he couldn't find one another. What's bizarre is that he told his parents that he thought he was near the town of Lind, which isn't even on the path from Canby to Marshall, his college to hometown. Canby is 30 miles northwest of Marshall. Lind is 7 miles southwest. Police speculated that he saw the light on top of a grain elevator in Taunton, near where his car was found, roughly halfway between Canby and Marshall. That's my understanding. Keep in mind that we don't know how intoxicated he was, and we also don't know if he'd just conked his head hard enough to add significantly to his disorientation and confusion. Talking about being near Lynn might be more of a symptom of a head injury and or intoxication than just simply being lost. Also, one of the podcasts or something I'd listened to said that he seemed short, irritated, or frustrated, and that was slightly uncharacteristic for him. That also might be the alcohol and or a head injury more than simply being convinced he's near Lind and growing naturally frustrated with his parents' ineptitude. Very often, memory patients or patients with TBI will become frustrated, irritated, or even aggressive, and further lock onto their mistaken beliefs about what's happening instead of having the insight to step back and reassess competing or conflicting information, like getting angry with parents over not seeing them flashing their headlights and assuming they're somewhere in the wrong versus realizing that if they're where they say they are and flashing their headlights, then it's the patient who's most likely in the wrong place. I don't know what this is referring to, but that's all very weird. That sounds like something out of a thriller movie rather than some kind of real-life situation. And I don't know, maybe we'll find a story later on that matches the name to this story. Story 3. William Tyrell. In 2014, the 3-year-old boy went missing from his foster grandmother's yard whilst playing with his sister. His foster mother and grandmother were apparently watching them play outside, and the foster mother went inside to make a cup of tea. Then they noticed they hadn't seen or heard from him in a while and searched the house and yard. In 2021, police began searching national parkland near the grandmother's home for human remains. They also revealed that the foster mother and grandmother were persons of interest in his presumed passing. Earlier today, the foster mother pleaded guilty to assaulting another foster child that was in her care, 10-year-old girl. She's also been charged with intimidating and stalking a minor. Her husband has also been charged with the same crimes, but pled not guilty to all counts. The foster grandmother is now passed on. Basically, police believe that William expired whilst in the care of the foster family, and they disposed of his body to cover it up. Police are recommending that the foster parents be charged with perverting the course of justice and interfering with a corpse. His photos went viral at the time of the disappearance. He went missing whilst in a Spider-Man costume, and the photo that was distributed was taken minutes before. Edit. Forgot a word. It should have said that the foster father actually pleaded not guilty to the charges. A very similar thing happened recently in Hawaii. 6-year-old Isabella Kalua went missing from her bedroom in the middle of the night. The island went all out to look for her, but strangely, her family, they had fostered and adopted her, were not helping the search. After weeks of searching, investigators interviewed her sister, also a young child, and she told them she had witnessed her unresponsiveness. Their parents took her away, and she never saw her again. They were keeping the poor girl locked in a dog cage at night because she would get food from the kitchen because she was hungry. It was so heartbreaking, and those monsters still will not even say where they put the body so her birth family can have closure. That's just sinister right there. And in Hawaii, I don't know, it's maybe me not thinking things very complexly, but in Hawaii, it seems like there's not a lot of space where anybody could hide in that. But it seems like the family wasn't really hiding to begin with as far as their behavior. I think there was a recent case about someone being charged with child neglect for her own kids that kind of rings along with stories like these that just turn my stomach a bit. Story 1. I'm a fan of taking my dates bowling and then for coffee or drinks. Something fun and light to make sure we mesh before longer dates. Arcades are a ton of fun. Wish we had more in the US like the ones I saw in Japan last year. I had a blast in those arcades and could see it being a solid date spot. We have some arcades in Cape Town, but they're not nearly as cool as they used to be, which is such a bummer. I took my brother to Hub Zero when we were in Dubai. Man, it was so much fun. I'm planning on going to Japan next year, and I luckily have family in Tokyo, so free accommodation. And I can't wait to explore. Dubai looks crazy at all times. I can only imagine what those arcades look like. You'll love Japan. The vibe is immaculate, and I highly recommend going during the fall. The weather was great. Wore jeans and a t-shirt with an occasional jacket or flannel. Went for Halloween, second week of November, and can't wait to go back next year. I wanted to send a link to the arcade, but I see it's permanently closed. What a pity. Dubai is overrated AF anyways. We were there helping our sister with a work event she was invited to. I'd missed his birthday that year, so I took him there as a treat. I want to go for the Sakura Festival because that's been on my bucket list for years. The downside is that it's insanely busy. The flowers only bloom for a week, so it's packed with people, and as a general rule, I don't travel anywhere during peak seasons. Everything is fracking expensive and places are crowded AF. Cape Town is a tourist city, and this place is packed during summer, so I prefer to face a lot less chaos when I travel. And the first part, I like that strategy of just going out for something simple, like coffee or, like coffee. I don't drink. That way, you can take some time really getting to know someone and talking, and you can probably get some ideas if you're really good at listening on future dates. And if they're down for an arcade, I'm down too. If it's a good arcade. Story 2. I'm not a man, but first dates are generally meant to be shorter to decide if you actually have interest in the person. Coffee or drinks and an appetizer are easier first dates than those things can last an hour and be extended if both parties are enjoying it. I'm a man, and this is my exact thought. First dates for me are about having a conversation and getting to know someone. I've even had great first dates where we both realized that we aren't really going further with this, but still had a blast getting to know each other. That's a great outcome, to be honest. It's not always meant to be. If it's a first date after meeting through a dating app, this is the way. Coffee or a beer. I just want an in-person interaction to see if there's chemistry. If it's a first date with someone I met organically, then it depends entirely on my established connection with the person. However, early dates are meant to be fun and to see if I can have lighthearted, fun conversation with the person. Guess it depends. On my last date, we got drinks and had apps. Lasted maybe 30 minutes and we really didn't talk after. My date last night, we got drinks, food, and dessert. We were there for about 3 hours and had an amazing time. We also have a follow-on date for the next weekend. See, that's cool. And if you know the person, I think that's a good strategy, that if you know something about that person that they'd specifically like and you have some kind of other activity planned after coffee or drinks, or a possible activity if things are going well, I think that's a good strategy too. I think they brought that up. Story 3. I'm done first dating, but the following have happened. Ice skating, indoor rock climbing, retro arcade, bowling, hikes, hockey game or other sporting event, lots of pubs and patio drinks, beach day, museums. I don't believe I've ever had dinner as a first date. In short, I kind of just plain something I want to do anyhow, but with someone hot. See, that's very good. Let me see. Ice skating, I'd be down for it. I don't live in places that are usually ice skating. Indoor rock climbing, never done that before, but I'd be down. Retro arcade, completely. That's my jam right there. Bowling, yep, that's good too. Hikes, I do that a lot. I do a lot of walking, and if you don't mind sweating, or other person's sweat. Hockey game, Lots of pubs and patio drinks. I don't drink, so no. Beach day, cool. Bring the sunscreen. I'm down. Museums, that would spark a lot of conversation. I'm down with most of these. Story 4. We just want to hang out and have a good time. The pressure to impress a woman is really dumb and should go away. If you're looking for an impressive man, go look somewhere else. I get it. I'm not sure I would like to just be part of the many women he's trying to impress. I would want him to be a bit more selective with who he puts effort towards and when. I also find if someone is trying too hard to impress me right from the start, it comes off manipulative and a bit fake. Be kind, respectful, make me laugh. I make you laugh. Then we go from there. I'm 26 and it's been 3 years since I've impressed anyone. I need to catch up before I feel like settling down with one person at this point. Story 5. Vanquish our enemies. See them tremble before us. Listen to the lamentations of the women. Good! That is good, good. Physical intimacy should be had before a first date. It's such an important part of any relationship, it makes no sense to save it until later. Story 6. Men are like, why don't women just ask directly instead of playing games? And then when you actually do, the answer is, vanquish enemies. Pilot a mech suit. I like to get coffee and talk while walking around the piers or wharfs in my area. There are a ton, and it offers a peaceful and natural scenery that's lovely to look at, but not too distracting so you can actually have a conversation. I like to walk because it gets your mind moving for interesting topics, and also because it's usually a bit harder for my date to walk and focus on her phone at the same time. Walking boosts creativity, so it's great to do on a first date. I actually hadn't really thought of that before. Walking is pretty good. That's why I always like to live close to like a beach or a place that has good walking spots so you can have that kind of thing. Hiking, I don't know if hiking boosts more creativity, but like I said, if you don't mind other people's sweat, and they don't either, then hey, go for that too. Story 7. I'll give a serious answer as a late 30s dude. Just hang out. Have a few drinks and chat. Be relaxed. The classic movie/meal/festival is hogwash. Can't talk or can't hear. Anywhere with a good atmosphere and maybe a little bit of background music, easygoing chat for an hour or two, catch some vibes, or not, then if there are no vibes, cuddle, cheek, kiss, go home. If vibes, then maybe a walk and or a bit more bouncing bar. Maybe a dance or at least getting to know a deeper vibe. If that works out, then swap numbers, kiss, maybe coffee. All are good results. Story 8. I like to play some sort of game on the date, whether it's bar games or bowling or mini golf or board games, arcade, cornhole, whatever. Any kind of game. It really gets both people to open up, and you can get a good feel for their personality. Like if they're super competitive, goofy, a sore loser, or mean. Also, it takes some of the direct focus off of each other. It can be super awkward to just be staring at each other across a table watching each other eat for an hour straight on the first date. I really like going to outdoor beer garden type places for first dates, assuming the girl likes beer. Good drinks, usually some good grub, fresh air, and some fun games to play. Story 9. Back when I was single, I used to always take women on more random dates to get a better feel for their personality. I always found that dinner or a drink would never show true colors, as we were always on our best behavior. Some things I used to do: antique shopping or vintage store shopping, psychic visit, short hike or walk depending on their skill level, Ren Fair or carnival. My wife of now 9 years and I did a massive hike together. I instantly knew at the top of the mountain she was someone I was super into, and we really got to know each other in those 2 hours. We haven't gone a day without seeing each other since then. I like the strategy of doing something that kind of gently throws them off track to try and get a feel for their real personality, but that's also something that could really backfire if you choose something that they end up really hating and it gives off a really bad first impression. But interesting. Story 10. I like something pretty low-key for a first date. Coffee or a drink or two, maybe combined with a walk. Basically, something inexpensive and fairly short where you can easily talk. Since the goal is to get to know each other, being able to talk is key. Also, something on the shorter side is good. If either person isn't feeling it, they have an easy out. Also, something that can easily be extended if things are going well is nice too. That's why I like coffee or a drink. If it's at a pub or something, maybe share an appetizer or something. Not so much a full meal. Easy to talk, totally reasonable to cut it off after an hour or two, or stay longer if things are going well. Story 1. Story time! I was taking courses via distance in order to complete my university degree. One particular class was an economics class. The professor that semester was filling in for the regular prof and had never taught via distance before and was using the regular prof's materials. No big deal, it's really not that hard. So midterms roll around. We write the multiple choice midterm and our proctors mail it back in. Being as there are people across the country and often in other countries taking the course, the tests take a while to come back and be graded. Cool. So one day we log into the online courseware and see that our grades are posted along with a very long and ranty email from the professor. The entire class failed the midterm. She insisted that she double and triple check the answer key, and it was right, and that she'd never had such a thing happen before. She also admonished us for not studying hard enough and that we really had to work to pass the final. As you can imagine, there was nothing but uproar amongst the class. No one could believe that not even one person passed the midterm. So we waited for the midterms to be returned to us. Along the way, she decided to compromise and offer us a very fair final, double all midterm marks so they were where they should be, and use the better mark between the two for the course grade, as long as the final was passed. Now it's 3 weeks before the final, and everyone is flipping the frack out to ensure we completely understand the material. Online study groups are created, questions and discussions abound. Then, midterms began arriving back at students' homes. We began posting questions about the answers. Why was X wrong for question A? The professor gave very lengthy and detailed answers for the first few that had been posted, and we were confused. The answers she had given us were to questions that weren't on our midterms. The professor went silent. After berating us for being idiots and insisting that it wasn't her fault, the professor profusely apologized for inadvertently correcting all the exams using the answer key for a different version of the exam. Best cluster frack ever. Wow. It's interesting that with all the stuff that's going on online and the internet, they had to mail in the midterms. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be some kind of anti-cheat mechanism or something like that. But really, out of all this, after all those things she was grading, it never occurred to her to think, maybe I'm using the wrong answer key. Wow. Story 2. Dentists will appreciate this one. My girlfriend at the time was unhappy with the appearance of her teeth, and rather than go with orthodontics, which my very professional dentist had recommended, opted to go with the instant solution of crowns and veneers, nearly a dozen in all, suggested by a dentist at some random strip mall. Doing this work required her to get 6 root canals. Her first appointment for the work was a Friday at about 2 p.m. They worked on her for 3 hours, and when it was 5 p.m., it was quitting time. They stopped work, put a temporary bridge on her, and said they'd see her in 2 weeks when her next appointment was scheduled, and sent her home. Once the lidocaine wore off, she was in agonizing pain. By Sunday, she literally asked me to unalive her. Calls to the dentist service went unreturned. Monday morning, she called and was told the pain was normal and they wouldn't see her earlier. That afternoon, I called my dentist, explained the situation, and brought her in immediately. He gave her some lidocaine, which provided instant relief, and then took the temporary bridge off. Next, he said out loud, "Holy hell," and told his assistant to get the camera, and took about 50 pictures. He left and went into his office, and then came back, put the temp back on, gave her a script for Percocet, and told us to call her dentist again and make an appointment. We did, and it was scheduled for 7 a.m. the next morning. Apparently, they had started 6 root canals on Friday, but not completed many of them. Just opened the tooth and exposed the nerve, but not actually destroyed it, and left the tooth open with a minimal packing but no actual filling, and expected my girlfriend to live with that for 2 weeks with no pain meds. I talked with my dentist about it on a later date, and according to him, this was about the single most painful thing a dentist could do to a person, and had they not taken the appointment the next morning, he was going to hand the pics over to the state's Ethics Review Board. Too long didn't read? A bad dentist tortured my girlfriend. I would not go back to that dentist. Explain to me what's going on, give me the pictures, make an appointment and do the right thing with that person's dentist, and still report to the ethics board. That's too extreme. No way. I've had dental work done. These teeth? No. If I was going to be in that much pain because they wanted to stop in the middle of it? No. No. Story 3. I had wrecked my mountain bike on a South Mountain trail and ripped open my arm pretty good. Ugh. I also broke 2 rims, cracked my helmet, and blew out my front shock. I was in and out of consciousness on the road to urgent care. Because it was early Sunday morning, the first 2 places we went to were closed, and we ended up at a little clinic. This young doctor, 3 years out of medical school, cleaned my wound, pulled all the rocks and dirt out of my skin, and then stitched up the large flap of skin that was torn back. He gave me 2 pain pills and told me to have a good day. Well, apparently, you're not supposed to stitch wounds up like that and are supposed to let them drain and breathe. I went in 2 days later to get more pain pills because my arm hurt so bad it was keeping me up at night. The doctor on staff told me I had to be admitted to a hospital with an ER immediately because my whole arm was infected and it was starting to reach my lungs. I had a massive infection that ended up hospitalizing me for days, and then I had to have a surgery where they removed a good part of my forearm tissue to let it all regrow. I spent more than a month packing and cleaning out a dollar-sized wound as my tissue regrew. Worst experience of my life. To answer the most common question, no, I did not sue. We thought about it, but figured that would only contribute to the broken healthcare system. I guess I came to terms like this. The doctor had to learn somewhere. There were always people graduating at the bottom of the class. Again, this was an emergency. The fact that they had to go to a small clinic and not an ER where there were professionals around just still speaks to how broken the healthcare system is. I'm glad I just have the health constitution that I have. Story 4. My wife went to a professional conference out of town when she was 7 months pregnant with our first child. It was about a 4-hour drive from home, and she was a little concerned, so she asked me to go with her. She didn't consult with her OB/GYN. While we were there, her water broke. We went to the local hospital, and they said she was going to be bedridden for the next several weeks, so unless we wanted to stay there, we should get in the car and drive like heck back to our hometown. When we got home, we went directly to the hospital, and they admitted her. They kept her in a bed with her feet higher than her head and checked her several times a day for infections. Her OB/GYN was nowhere to be found. My wife was a registered nurse at the same hospital where she was staying. Her friends, other RNs, would come by and chat with her frequently. They let her know that the OB/GYN was mad at her for leaving town without telling him and complaining to everyone in the hospital about her. After she'd been there for a couple weeks, the OB/GYN showed up. I was in the room along with several of her friends. He smelled strongly of alcohol. He walked up to the bed without saying anything while pulling on a glove. He pulled up her gown and jammed his hand in while everyone was standing there. He then made a few incomprehensible sounds and stormed out. We didn't see him again for a couple weeks. The tests for infection finally came back positive, so they were going to induce labor. Her OB/GYN showed up, and even though the staff doctor said she could deliver normally, her doctor insisted she needed a cesarean section. My wife was really disappointed, but we went along with what he said. We later found out he wanted her to have a cesarean section because he had a tea time that afternoon and didn't want to miss it. I wanted to complain, but he was the head of obstetrics at the hospital, and there would be repercussions to her job if we did. Story 5. I work as a summer rec director for the local school district, so I basically spent my days watching 30 children of various ages run around a playground and get into trouble. Now, some of these kids have special needs, and in that case may have an aide to help keep an eye on them. One day, some boys about 10 found a hornet's nest in the ground, and unknown to me, decided to poke it with a stick. This ticked the bees off, understandably, so they started to swarm around the area. I realized and started warning the kids to stay away. While I did, a boy named Tim with autism started wandering over, oblivious to the problem and my shouts. His aide just stood there and fracking watched him do it. I ran across the park, grabbed him, and carried him away, slapping bees the whole time. He got stung 5 times, twice in the face. The aide said she had a phobia of bees and didn't want to get too close. To clear up any confusion, it was a yellow jacket nest, to be specific. I'm not sure if they're technically hornets or wasps, but wherein from people commonly refer to them as hornets. When I call them bees, I'm quoting the aide who was incorrect. This is part of the reason I don't think she had an actual phobia, but instead, like most people, felt anxious around stinging insects. That and the many other times she was dangerously irresponsible while doing her job. I have nothing against people with legitimate phobias. Wow, what a jerk. Way to go below and well within the call of duty. Story 1. 2 of my favorites are the attack of the unalive men and the Brown Stigler incident. The attack of the unalive men occurred during 1915 World War I when the Germans laid siege to the Russians in Oswiec Fortress in modern Poland. First, the Germans shelled the fort and attacked the Russians' hold. During the second attack, the Germans used heavier artillery guns to destroy the fort. Once again, the Russians repulsed the attack. The third time, the Germans used a combination of artillery and chlorine gas. As the German infantry advanced, they heard screaming and saw Russian soldiers charging them. The Russians were covered in chemical burns, eyes red from the gas, and they were coughing up blood. Once again, the Germans pulled back. The Russians evacuated the fort 2 weeks later. The Brown Stigler incident occurred during World War II. A B-17 Ye Olde pub was heavily damaged during a bombing run on Bremen. Several of its crew were destroyed or injured. 2 engines were out, a section of the tail was blown away, and the radio was disabled. The bomber lost altitude and was saved by the captain, Charlie Brown. The bomb flew over an airfield and was spotted by a German fighter ace Franz Stigler. Stigler took off, caught up to the bomber, had it in his sights, then realized that the tail gunner was not firing. At this point, he noticed how damaged the B-17 was and took the advice of his former CO to never shoot a man in a parachute. He decided that the bomber was no longer combat capable and was in distress, like a man in a parachute. So he pulled to the side of the B-17 and signaled for Brown to land at the airfield, where when Brown continued to fly, Stigler tried to get him to fly to Sweden. Once again, Brown continued on. When Stigler realized that Brown was going to try to return to England, he pulled to the bomber's wing and escorted to the English Channel, where he gave Brown a salute and returned to Germany. To make a long story short, after the war, Brown found Stigler, and the two became close friends until their passing. A book was written called A Higher Call by Adam Makos. That is two amazing stories. When you hear about how the stories of war and the things that men will go to, where people will go to while fighting, can be completely extreme, you almost don't expect completely valiant stories like this. Those two were just incredible. Do you know of any stories like these? Story 2. So during the Spanish-American War, right after it broke out, the U.S. Pacific Fleet got wind that the Spanish had their Pacific Fleet sitting in Manila Bay in the Philippines. So the U.S. fleet sails from Hong Kong to go attack them, and along the way, a British fleet saw them headed full steam somewhere and figured they must be headed for a battle. Well, since there were no training videos or simulations in 1898, the best way to get experience was to either be in a battle or watch one. So they followed along behind the Americans to see what was going to happen. Well, as they continued on, a German fleet saw them as well and made the same decision the Brits did and followed along to watch. It's important to mention here that the U.S. ships were the best of the time. Only the British had similar ships, and these new U.S. ships were the best in the world, though low in number. So on top of the spectacle of a battle, everyone wanted to know how they would perform. So finally, the Americans get to Manila Bay and find the Spanish still at anchor in the harbor. So they sail up and blockade it. Morning comes, and the Spanish wake up to find the harbor blocked by 6 of the best ships money could buy at the time, and past them an assortment of British and German ships and a couple reserved ships from the U.S. fleet. Well, the Spanish, having no idea what the heck is happening, refused to surrender, and unfortunately for them, the American guns were longer range, so they just sat out there and absolutely destroyed them while Spanish shells splashed in the water hundreds of feet away. They fired 6,000 shells at the Spanish. In the end, virtually the entire Spanish fleet was either at the bottom of the harbor or so damaged it was useless. 75 men were dead and hundreds wounded, and the only major naval force the Spanish had in the Pacific Ocean was done for. The U.S. side had a handful of injuries and only one fatality, which was an old engineer who succumbed to heat stroke during the battle. This is just the war equivalent of somebody just on a mission to get to someone and everybody else following to see what will happen. It's just when you see a school fight at the end of school where everybody gathers to just watch, this is that. It's kind of funny. Story 3. In World War II, there was a Spanish spy named Joan Pujol Garcia who approached the Allies to work for them. When they refused, he approached the Nazis, and they accepted him, giving him the code name Arabelle. Once he earned credentials working as a Nazi spy, he approached the Allies again, this time getting a job as a double agent, codenamed Garbo. This is where it gets unbelievable. He fed the Germans a combination of misinformation, true but useless information, and high-value information that always got to the Germans just a little too late. He even started a spy network consisting of 27 sub-agents of his own. Keep in mind that not a single one of these sub-agents existed. They were completely imaginary. But regardless, he submitted expense reports for them and had the Nazis giving him money to pay their salaries. At one point, when he had to explain why some high-value information got to the Germans late, he told them that one of his spies had expired. He actually got the Germans to pay the imaginary spy's imaginary wife a very real pension for her loss. Not only did his false information get the Nazis to waste millions of dollars, but he was also instrumental in convincing the Nazis that the attack on D-Day were just a diversion and the real attack was yet to come, keeping vital German resources away from the front lines. He is only one of the only people to ever get an Iron Cross from the Germans, which required Hitler's personal authorization since he wasn't a soldier, and an MBE from King George VI. Wow. Catfishing. That is the king of catfishing. Don't come at anybody with your little plans until you can match this level. This is the master. Story 4. More people know about this now compared to if you had posted this question like 6 months ago, but the story of the Clotilda, the last slave ship to carry slaves from Africa to the U.S. The importation of slaves into the U.S. had been outlawed by the federal government in 1808, but the international slave trade was still active. In 1859, the captain of the ship bet a rich man that he could import some slaves from Africa. He sailed that year and made it back, smuggled them into port at night, took them up the river, and then transferred them to a steamship and burnt the Clotilda. The slaves were split according to the people who fronted the money for the captain to sail and were enslaved alongside the American-born slaves and were freed after the Civil War. The captain was tried, but not convicted. The slaves settled on recovered land and founded a town called Africatown that's still there. It got launched back into the news recently because there's been a lot of attempts to find the last U.S. slave ship, and people believe that they found it a few months ago. Story 5. When Ivan III of Russia married Zoe Sophia Palaiologina, niece of Dragoces Palaiologos or Constantine XI, her uncle gifted them a library along with many other treasures. This library somehow survived the burning of Moscow in 1493 and continued to be passed down to her son, Vasily III, and then on to her grandson, Ivan IV. During Ivan IV's reign of terror, the second half of his reign, he feared the library was too precious a treasure and worried it would be stolen. So he and a few men took the collection out of Moscow, what was most likely a 1 to 3 day horse ride, and buried the books, possibly in a vault. To ensure the location of the library would never get out, he had the men terminated. Ivan IV passed away before the location of the library was ever revealed. We have no idea what could have been in this library, or if the contents have even survived, though some historians have speculated that Plato's Hermocrates, the final dialogue pertaining to Atlantis, could have been part of the collection. There's no proof that this is true. Well, time to go to Russia and buy me a shovel.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.